Maksym spilled the coffee cups from his tray, and everyone in the restaurant was surprised. Why was the waiter who had provided perfect service for 6 months so agitated? The answer was simple. The 3 men who entered through the door were Russian agents, and their target was Volkov sitting at the table. Maksym's hand automatically went to his waist, searching for the weapon that wasn't there. His war reflexes had returned. Where are you watching this story from today? Perhaps from somewhere in Europe, maybe from the comfort of your warm home. Wherever you are, I'm sure you've never thought about how an ordinary restaurant waiter could save lives. Maksym's story will show how no matter how much we hide our identity, our true self emerges in critical moments. Maksym Kovalenko was born in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city. Before the war, he was a mechanical engineering student at Kharkiv National University. He was in his final year, writing his thesis on automotive systems. He had dreams of working for a major car manufacturer, maybe BMW or Volkswagen. He was an ordinary young man who loved football, played guitar in his free time, and had a girlfriend named Anya who studied medicine. February 24, 2022, changed everything. When Russian forces attacked Kharkiv, Maksym's world collapsed. The university was bombed, his apartment building was destroyed, and Anya was killed in a missile attack on the hospital where she was doing her internship. In one day, Maksym lost his future, his home, and his love. The pain was unbearable, but instead of fleeing like millions of others, Maksym chose to fight. He enlisted in the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and after basic training, he was assigned to the 92nd Mechanized Brigade, one of Ukraine's most elite units. For 8 months, he fought in urban combat in Kharkiv, learned street fighting, building clearing, and most importantly, how to survive when death lurked around every corner. Maksym wasn't naturally suited for war. He was quiet, thoughtful, and preferred solving problems with his mind rather than weapons. But loss had hardened him, and survival instinct had sharpened his senses. He learned to detect danger before it appeared, to move silently, and when necessary, to neutralize threats with deadly efficiency. In October 2022, during a particularly intense battle, Maksym's unit was surrounded. Of the 20 soldiers in his squad, only 4 survived. During the chaotic retreat, Maksym was separated from his comrades and forced to make his way alone through enemy-held territory. For 3 weeks, he moved westward, sleeping during the day, traveling at night. He avoided main roads, lived off what he could find, and slowly made his way toward the Polish border. The journey was hellish, constant fear of detection, hunger, cold, and the trauma of everything he'd witnessed. When he finally reached the Polish border, Maksym was a broken man. He'd lost 20 pounds, spoke to no one for days, and suffered from nightmares that woke him screaming. The Polish refugee services provided basic accommodation and psychological support, but Maksym refused most help. He just wanted to disappear, to become invisible. Maksym ended up in Warsaw, Poland's capital, and home to hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. The city was overwhelmed but welcoming. Polish families opened their homes, businesses offered jobs, and the government provided basic support. But Maksym didn't want charity. He wanted to work, to keep his mind occupied, to forget. Through a refugee assistance program, he found work at Stary Dom, Old House, a small traditional restaurant in Warsaw's historic Mokotów district. The owner, Janusz Kowalski, was a 60-year-old Pole who had lost his own son in a car accident years earlier. Janusz saw something in the quiet young Ukrainian that reminded him of his son. Maksym barely spoke Polish, but he was reliable, hard-working, and asked for nothing beyond fair wages. "You don't need to talk much to serve good food," Janusz would say. The work was perfect for Maksym. Repetitive, predictable, safe. He arrived at 6 a.m., prepared tables, served customers, cleaned up, and left at 10 p.m. He rented a small studio apartment nearby, sent most of his earnings to his parents, who had fled to Germany, and lived a life of deliberate routine. Most importantly, he was invisible. Customers barely noticed him, just another foreign waiter in a city full of refugees. This anonymity was exactly what Maksym needed to heal from the trauma of war. 3 months into his job, a new customer began coming to the restaurant. Dmitry Volkov was a Russian businessman in his 50s, well-dressed, always alone, and apparently wealthy. He spoke fluent Polish and claimed to be an import-export business, a vague description that could mean anything. Volkov came every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 8:30 a.m. He always sat at table 12 by the window, ordered black coffee and scrambled eggs, and read Polish newspapers while eating. He was polite but distant, never engaging in conversation beyond ordering food. For Maksym, Volkov represented everything he'd been fighting against. This man was Russian, probably connected to the regime that had destroyed his country and killed his girlfriend. Every time Maksym served him, he felt his jaw clench and his hands shake slightly. But he needed this job, and he couldn't afford to let personal feelings interfere. Over the months, Maksym learned to observe Volkov without being obvious about it. Old military habits died hard. Threat assessment was second nature. He noticed Volkov's expensive watch, his tailored suits, the way he always sat facing the door, and how he never used his phone inside the restaurant. Most interestingly, Maksym noticed that Volkov's Polish was too perfect. Native speakers make small grammatical mistakes, use slang, have regional accents. Volkov spoke like someone who had learned Polish professionally, thoroughly, but not naturally. Combined with his nervous habits and constant awareness of his surroundings, Maksym began to suspect that Volkov wasn't just any businessman. Despite his suspicions, Maksym settled into a routine with Volkov. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the same ritual: coffee, eggs, newspaper, polite nods, payment with exact change plus a modest tip. Neither man spoke more than necessary. Volkov never looked directly at Maksym, treating him as part of the furniture. This suited Maksym perfectly. The less attention he drew, the safer he felt. The war had taught him that visibility often meant danger. Other customers came and went, but Volkov was consistent. Rain or shine, holiday or regular day, he appeared at 8:30 a.m. Janusz joked that you could set your clock by the Russian businessman. Little did anyone know that this routine was about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. The morning everything changed. March 15, 2023, started like any other day. Maksym arrived at 6 a.m., went through his opening routine, and prepared for the morning rush. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, Volkov entered and took his usual seat at table 12. Maksym was preparing Volkov's coffee when he noticed something unusual through the restaurant's front window. 3 men were standing across the street, and they weren't casual passers-by. They were watching the restaurant with professional intensity. Maksym's military training kicked in immediately. The men were positioned to cover all exits. They wore long coats despite the warm spring weather, concealment for weapons. Most telling of all, they moved with the coordination of a trained team. As Maksym approached Volkov's table with coffee, he glanced at the Russian businessman. For the first time in months, Volkov looked nervous. His usual calm demeanor was cracked. He kept glancing at the door, and his hands weren't entirely steady as he unfolded his newspaper. That's when Maksym understood. Volkov was in danger, and those men outside were there to kill him. The irony wasn't lost on Maksym. Here was a Russian, possibly connected to the regime that had destroyed his life, about to be assassinated, probably by other Russians. His first instinct was to let it happen. Why should he care if Russians killed each other? But as Maksym set down the coffee cup, he looked at Volkov more carefully. The man was terrified, trying desperately to maintain his composure. And in that moment, Maksym saw not a Russian enemy, but a frightened human being. At 8:45 a.m., the 3 men entered the restaurant. They moved with casual precision, one toward the counter as if to order, one toward the bathroom, and the third directly toward Volkov's table. Classic triangulation, cutting off all escape routes. Maksym was refilling water glasses when he saw the lead man's hand move inside his coat. Professional instinct screamed danger. In that split second, Maksym had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could stay invisible, keep his head down, and let whatever was about to happen play out. Or he could act, revealing himself and risking everything he'd built in his quiet new life. The choice was made before his conscious mind could process it. Maksym dropped the coffee tray, sending cups crashing to the floor. Every head in the restaurant turned toward the commotion, including the 3 assassins. In the confusion, his hand instinctively went to his waist, searching for the sidearm that had been his constant companion for 8 months of war. The lead assassin's eyes locked with Maksym's, and both men recognized each other for what they were: soldiers. Gun. Maksym shouted in Polish, pointing at the lead man. He has a gun! The restaurant erupted in chaos. Customers screamed and dove under tables. The lead assassin, his cover blown, pulled out his weapon, a silenced pistol. But Maksym was already moving. 8 months of urban warfare had taught Maksym that hesitation kills. While civilians panicked and the other assassins struggled to adapt to the changed situation, Maksym acted with deadly precision. He grabbed a heavy serving tray and hurled it at the lead gunman, striking his weapon hand and sending the pistol skittering across the floor. Before the man could recover, Maksym vaulted over the counter and tackled him to the ground. The second assassin was drawing his weapon when Janusz, the restaurant owner, smashed a bottle over his head. The old Pole might not have understood what was happening, but he knew his restaurant was under attack, and his employees were in danger. The third man had Volkov by the collar and was dragging him toward the back exit when Maksym broke free from his wrestling match with the first attacker. Without thinking, he grabbed a kitchen knife from the prep station and threw it with the accuracy that 8 months of close-quarters combat had taught him. The thrown knife struck the third assassin in the shoulder, causing him to release Volkov and spin around in pain and rage. He raised his own weapon, but Maksym was already closing the distance. What followed was brutal and efficient. Maksym used every technique he'd learned in urban combat, improvised weapons, environmental advantages, and most importantly, the mindset that survival meant eliminating threats completely. The first assassin got back to his feet and came at Maksym with a combat knife. But Maksym had fought in bombed-out buildings where every piece of debris could be a weapon. He grabbed a heavy ceramic plate and used it as a shield, then smashed it into his attacker's face. The wounded third man was trying to escape through the kitchen when Maksym caught him. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Maksym had learned in Kharkiv that showing mercy to people trying to kill you was a luxury he couldn't afford. The aftermath. When the police arrived, they found a scene that looked like a war zone. 2 of the assassins were unconscious, the third was seriously wounded, and the restaurant was destroyed. But everyone was alive: customers, staff, and even Volkov. Maksym sat quietly in the corner, his hands shaking as the adrenaline wore off. He had hoped to stay invisible forever, but fate had other plans. His military training had saved lives, but it had also revealed who he really was. Volkov, for the first time in 6 months, looked directly at Maksym. "Spasibo," he said quietly in Russian. "Thank you." The Polish authorities quickly determined that this had been an assassination attempt by Russian intelligence services. Volkov, it turned out, was a defector, a former FSB officer who had been selling secrets to Western intelligence services. The hit team had tracked him to Warsaw and planned to eliminate him quietly. Maksym's intervention had not only saved Volkov's life, but had also prevented an international incident. If Russian assassins had successfully operated on Polish soil, it would have created a major diplomatic crisis. The media called Maksym a hero, but he didn't feel heroic. He felt exposed and vulnerable. His quiet, invisible life was over, and he didn't know what came next. Volkov's truth. In the days following the attack, Volkov requested to speak with Maksym privately. They met in a secure location arranged by Polish intelligence. "I know you hate Russians," Volkov began. "I know what my country has done to yours. I was part of that system for many years." Maksym listened without interrupting. "But I also know what it's like to lose everything, because you tried to do the right thing. When I decided to work against Putin's regime, I lost my family, my home, my identity. Just like you." Volkov explained that he had been feeding intelligence to Ukrainian forces, helping them anticipate Russian attacks and save civilian lives. His information had prevented bombings of hospitals and schools. "I can't give you back what you lost," Volkov continued. "But I can tell you that your girlfriend Anya, the medical student who died in Kharkiv, the hospital attack that killed her was supposed to happen 3 hours earlier, during the day shift when hundreds more would have died. My intelligence delayed it. We saved 300 people that day, but we couldn't save everyone." This revelation changed everything for Maksym. The man he'd seen as representing everything he hated had actually been working to protect people like Anya. The world wasn't as simple as Ukrainian good, Russian bad. There were people on both sides trying to do right in an impossible situation. Over the following weeks, Maksym and Volkov developed an unlikely friendship. 2 men who had lost everything, who had been shaped by violence, but were trying to find peace. They shared stories of what they'd lost, and what they hoped to build. Through Volkov's connections, Maksym was offered a position with a Western intelligence service. His military training, language skills, and ability to blend in made him valuable for operations involving Russian targets. The work would be dangerous, but it would also be meaningful. Instead of hiding from his past, Maksym could use it to help end the war that had destroyed so many lives. "I spent 6 months trying to disappear," Maksym told Janusz when he explained why he had to leave the restaurant. "But maybe disappearing isn't the answer. Maybe the answer is using what I learned to make sure other people don't have to go through what I did." 6 months later, Maksym was operating across Eastern Europe, gathering intelligence and disrupting Russian operations. He worked under various covers, sometimes a businessman, sometimes a tourist, sometimes a refugee seeking work. The quiet waiter who had wanted nothing more than to be invisible had become a ghost of a different kind, one who moved through shadows to protect others. He never forgot the lesson learned in that Warsaw restaurant. Sometimes the people we think are our enemies are fighting the same fight we are, just from a different side. And sometimes, the courage to act when others need help is more important than the safety of staying hidden. 2 years later, when the war finally began to wind down, Maksym returned to Warsaw. The Stary Dom restaurant had been rebuilt, and Janusz welcomed him back like a son. Volkov was still in Warsaw, still working with Western intelligence, still looking over his shoulder but no longer alone. The 2 men met regularly now, sharing meals and stories, bound by the moment when a Ukrainian soldier chose to save a Russian defector's life. "Do you ever regret it?" Volkov asked during one of their dinners. "Giving up your quiet life to save someone like me?" Maksym considered the question carefully. "I thought I wanted to disappear after the war. But what I really wanted was for the war to mean something. Saving your life, stopping those assassins, that meant something. And the work we do now, preventing other wars, protecting other innocent people, that means something too."
Maksym's story spread through intelligence circles as an example of how personal trauma could be transformed into purposeful action. He became a trainer for other refugee operatives, teaching them how to use their pain as strength and their losses as motivation. But he never forgot the simple lesson learned in a Warsaw restaurant. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of fear when others need help. And sometimes, the people who need our help the most are the ones we least expect to save. The war had taken Maksym's old life, but in that moment of spilled coffee and split-second decisions, it had given him a new one. Not the quiet, invisible existence he thought he wanted, but a life of purpose, danger, and the knowledge that he was making a difference in a world that desperately needed people willing to act when action mattered most. As our story ends, we see Maksym back in the restaurant where everything changed, training a new refugee, how to serve tables and blend in. But this time, blending in isn't about hiding, it's about preparing to help when the moment comes. Because sometimes the most ordinary people in the most ordinary places are exactly the ones the world needs to do extraordinary things. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Warriors Whisper community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.